And just to give you a practical example of how real it feels, I was told I would be ill-advised to have my golf holiday last month in Hawaii, as I was my writing in Quadrant criticizing the Trump regime was likely to have me on a list, and I might be detained and put in the cells at the border.
I'm Bob Forsyth. This is Liberalism in Question, an occasional series of podcasts from us at the Centre for Independent Studies, looking at issues around classical liberalism, its strengths, its weaknesses, opportunities, why people critique it, and what should be done. Today I'm delighted to have Roger Partridge with me. Roger is in New Zealand, that's why he's appearing on Zoom. He's the founder and senior fellow of the New Zealand Initiative, a think tank committed to, I guess, what makes to make New Zealand prosperous. It's a very pragmatic, evidence-based think tank, although many of its fellows, Roger tells me, are themselves committed to forms of classical liberalism. The reason I've got Roger on is that liberalism has come under a lot of critique lately for being too thin, for not having enough to offer. And there's been a movement that liberalism really does need in a society what some people have called strong gods, deeper metaphysical commitments. In fact, Roger wrote a piece for Quillette called Classical Liberalism Without Strong Gods. Roger, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Rob.
Firstly, what do you mean by classical liberalism?
I mean the political tradition that's economically conservative and socially liberal. The economic strand is about free markets and limited government, a combination, if you like, of Adam Smith's Invisible Hand and Milton Friedman's Capitalism and Freedom. Importantly, though, classical liberals, or at least in my conception, recognise the need for more than just a minimalist state, a state to provide public goods, education and a social welfare safety net that promotes opportunity without stifling responsibility. I think that's how I'd put it. And then the socially liberal strand is about personal freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of religion and belief, what John Locke called freedom of conscience and Karl Popper called the open society, and of course equality before the law. And the beauty of those two strands is how they work in combination. If you have one without the other, if you have economic freedom without social freedom, that gives you authoritarian capitalism. China's probably the best example of that, but it delivers growth at the cost of conscience and individual dignity. And social freedom without economic freedom, well, that's a little bit like New Zealand was in the 1970s and 80s. It produces economic stagnation. Countries where people can speak freely but not build prosperous futures. That was our challenge in New Zealand before we went through a series of painful reforms in the 1980s. And then combining those two strands delivers both prosperity and human dignity. Anyway, that's my conception. How does that sound?
No, it sounds impressive. In fact, I noticed you referred to Karl Popper's phrase, the open society. And I notice in your writing, you've got a lot of time for Popper's characterisation of what a liberal society should be.
I do. And it's a little bit partly the Kiwi connection. Karl Popper wrote The Open Society and Its Enemies while taking refuge during World War II in Canterbury University in Christchurch in the South Island of New Zealand. Quite incredible to think that such a momentous work in the classical liberal canon would be written almost incognito in Christchurch. They had no idea really what they had in their midst. And of course, he went on to have a stellar career at London School of Economics.
I don't want to spend too long on Popper, but can you explain, what does he mean by the open society and what's its alternative?
He distinguishes open societies from closed societies. So closed societies typically authoritarian with a dictated religious morality. They can be either totalitarian or religious. Open societies are pluralistic, where you have freedom of conscience. And Popper was writing the open society as the twin scourges of totalitarianism and communism nearly destroyed Europe in the 1930s and 40s. And he wrote the Open Society as a defence against what was happening in continental Europe.
So open societies are not based upon ethnic or religious identities, but civic identity.
That's right, based on civic identities and pluralistic in the sense that they will accommodate a range of beliefs.
Right.
We might get into that a bit, Rob, but
well, let me ask
they can tolerate anything except intolerance.
Yes. We'll come to that certainly. Now, you write, and I think you're right, you are correct on this, that at the moment a lot of people are unimpressed with liberalism. They regard it as okay, I guess, as far as it goes, but deeply inadequate. Do you want to comment on some of these critiques that you notice in your paper?
Yeah, so I first really came into close personal contact with the critiques from the Christian nationalist right in Sydney, as it happens, at the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship conference about this time last year, listening to Jordan Peterson claim that the really only path to salvation was through a commitment to a transcendent other. But Peterson's just part of a very broad movement, especially in the United States, of Christian nationalists who say the open society and the Popper conception is so hollowed out that it's too thin to be sustainable. There's the academics Patrick Deneen, Adrian Vermeulen, N.S. Lyons, theologian R.R. Reno, and others, and some of my intellectual heroes, Sir Neil Ferguson and Ayaan Hirsi Ali, have rediscovered religion as a cure for liberalism's ills. And they argue a mixture of things. Deneen thinks liberalism has succeeded itself to death. Reno claims the post-war elites suppressed binding loyalties to God and nation instead installing what he calls the weak gods of tolerance and pluralism. Vermeulen, perhaps the most extreme, calls for common good constitutionalism, with the state enforcing a particular view of the common good and openly promoting Catholic natural law theory. And Lyons calls for a widely read pseudonymous author, although he outed himself this year. He demands the restoration of nationalism and religious faith as binding forces against what he calls civilizational dissolution.
One of the features of liberalism, as I understand it, is that it does. We'll come back. Surely, it's not without values. It's not valueless, and I want to come to that towards the end of our conversation. But that it brackets what you may call life's biggest questions. Is there a God? What is the purpose of life? These things are not something which a liberal society has as a common binding answer, if I'm not mistaken.
No, that's right, and that's at its heart. It's pluralistic. Right. And you can trace it back to John Locke's Letter of Tolerance in 1689, looking back over 100 years of the wars of religion, which had decimated Europe, and calling for religious tolerance, so to allow different conceptions of the good life rather than one particular canon. And interestingly, it was published in 1689. He didn't acknowledge that he was the author of it until the year he died. So we were still on the road to tolerance.
And if I remember correctly, his tolerance did not include papists and others. He was atheist. I think he had it was a very Protestant view of toleration.
That's right. Yeah. No, I might have struggled in that.
We'll see. Well, luckily we've gone beyond that, I think. Now, that's a pretty, going back to my original question about what people are criticising, that's a fairly phalanx of significant thinkers who are critiquing liberalism as being too thin. What's wrong with their diagnosis, Roger?
Well, can I come back to that in a moment and just say, of course, there's a second challenge.
Oh, please.
To liberalism, and the one that your listeners in Australia and certainly here in New Zealand are more familiar with is the intolerant left. The the intolerant politics of identity. So we've got this twin attack on liberalism from the intolerant left, which sees disagreement as a form of harm, and when opposing views are not treated as arguments but are regarded as violence to be suppressed, then that's the end of the open society. The open society closes. So we've got this really quite dangerous challenge on the left from identity politics, and then we've got this emerging challenge, I think, on the right, calling for the strong gods of either nation or religion.
In fact, am I right that those on the right don't think liberalism is adequate to deal with the crisis of the attack on the left?
No, that's exactly right. And I think that's where I part company with them. So I think theirs is a dangerous misdiagnosis, and that what they risk doing is burning down the house in order to save it.
Yes, tell me what you think is wrong with their diagnosis, Roger.
Well, first of all, you can't. Well, there's two ways to approach this. Why I think what they're suggesting is wrong, and what I think really has gone wrong with liberalism, and that was really the guts of my Strong Gods essay in Quillette. I think on imposing religion, imposing the strong gods, well, there are some practical problems. There's the problem of what history tells us, and then there's the general coherence of what it is they're arguing for. The first practical issue is you can't impose transcendent belief by fiat. You can't do that. And history is littered with attempts to do just that and the carnage that results from it. You can, whether you look back to Locke's time or just before Locke's time, with the wars of religion, as Protestants and Catholics fought each other.
Not just that, Protestants and Protestants in England.
Well, that's true.
It wasn't between Catholics and Protestants, between Anglicans and the rest.
That's right. And the 30 Years' War alone killed a fifth of the population of the Holy Roman Empire. So that's, if you like, the best example of what comes when you try to enforce a religious view on your.
I agree. By the way, but is that what the critics are saying? Are they really committed to some kind of enforcement?
Well, a particular form of doctrine that will determine how society operates, and less tolerant of alternative views.
Because I think it was Francis Fukuyama who I think made a point that I do find quite attractive, that liberalism is a solution to the problem of pluralism.
Yeah. Well, yes. Well, you can't get rid of pluralism, or you can't get rid of liberalism, because if you
can get rid of one, but not. No, his point was, we have liberalism. Sorry, pluralism is a reality. The best way to deal with that in a society is by having a liberal society, than trying to have compulsion to reduce pluralism.
No, well, Frank Fukuyama and I are absolutely on the same page on that. So it's all very well to say we need strong gods. Well, what does that mean? Are we going back to undoing the separation between church and state? Because we've been down that path before and it has never ended well. And then if we're not going the religious route, if it's the nationalistic route, well, that's not ended all that well in history either. And the middle of the 20th century, the wars in the first half of the 20th century, probably the best example of that. And it was against that Popper wrote The Open Society and Its Enemies. So ideologies that promise unity and meaning through strong gods invariably end up with tyranny and carnage. And in some extent, if you look around the world now at the societies that are heading back towards some form of constitutional nationalism or Christian nationalism. You've got Hungary under Orban over the last 15 years. Well, the outcome of that is surveys tell us that 55% of Hungarians aged between 18 and 40 want to emigrate.
You don't think, Roger, it's possible to have a soft nationalism, a sense of us as a community that binds us together rather than just simply tolerance, individualism and freedom?
Yes, absolutely, Rob. And that's one of the bits of medicine I propose in my essay. So I think that is part of the cure.
So you're not against nationalism itself, or a sense of us being the one people of a sort. It's the strong forms you regard as inimical to true freedom.
It's the blood and soil nationalism that is the danger in history, not the form of constitutional patriotism, if you like, which comes from pride in the civic institutions of your country and pride in place.
So you think that the misdiagnosis is that the strong God people don't understand that their solution is worse than what they're complaining about?
That's right. And I think as a result, they're blind to what the real problems are.
That's what I want to ask you. Is there anything wrong with liberalism at the moment, and what is that?
Yeah, I think when the strong God's advocates, let's call them that, king and country or God and country,
Altar and throne.
Yes, when surveys tell us that the West, the young especially, do feel dislocated, lonely, and adrift. Trust is at all-time lows in most advanced Western democracies, and you can't help but notice political polarization. So we do have a series of ailments, but my view is that they don't stem from a lack of religion or blood and soil nationalism. They're causes, and I've got four principal causes which I discuss in the essay. And the first is a failure of policy. And this is where I spend most of my working week, on practical policy issues that are failing many in our societies. And I think this is the primary cause why there's a sense of...
Can you give me an example of what you mean?
Unaffordable housing is right up on the top of the list. In Sydney, you've got median house prices exceeding 10 times median household incomes. An education system that doesn't equip school leavers for taking advantage of the good life. In many Western countries, New Zealand, Australia, America, Britain has improved after the Michael Gove reforms, very high levels of functional illiteracy and functional innumeracy amongst school leavers, on some measures as high as 40%. We've got welfare systems that track people in dependency. So when young people can't afford homes, when the schools fail to equip them with the skills necessary to exceed in life, when welfare systems trap them in dependency, it's little wonder that they lose faith with liberalism. But they're not losing faith so much in freedom, but in institutions that are no longer delivering for them. And so I think the biggest challenge for liberal societies is to make them work for all their citizens. And I think we're failing in that. I think we've been terribly complacent, especially in New Zealand, about the endowment we've been given, and we've not made it work for too many Kiwis, which is why you've got so many of them in Australia, incidentally. But the problem's not ours. You can see the same problems in Australia, in the US, in Britain, and in continental Europe. So I think the first issue is policy failures. Liberal democracy is not working for enough citizens, and the solution is not philosophical. It is addressing the policy challenges that are causing our societies not to deliver.
Do you have a learning style that makes you absorb information more effectively? Maybe you're a more logical left brain person or a more creative right brain person. Do humans only use 10% of their brain? Does physical coordination exercises help the two sides of your brain coordinate better? If you answered yes to any of these questions, you've tested positive for neuromyths. Neuromyths are misconceptions about how people learn that are pretty common, but downright dangerous when held by teachers. The good news, it's curable. Download the paper, Knowledge is Power, What Teachers Believe About Learning at cis.org.au.
Before you move on to the other three things that in a sense have gone wrong, why do you think the policy failures are right across certainly the English-speaking liberal world? You've just mentioned Australia, New Zealand, United Kingdom, elsewhere. The same problems right across the world. Why is that?
Well, let's take housing. I think Australia, New Zealand and England have ill-affordable housing. I think there's a common cause, and it has something to do with the way we fund local government, which seems like a very technical answer to a complex problem. But we have local councils that are incentivised to say no to development because they can't afford to provide the infrastructure. We took our members, 40 CEOs and chairs, to Switzerland to see how you can do things differently. And of course, Switzerland has a lot of policy settings that most of us would like, very strong civic architecture or civic institutions, local civic institutions. But on housing, they've had almost the same level of net inwards migration as New Zealand over the last 20 years, but they've had only 1/10 the house price inflation. And you can trace it back to how local government works. So that's one category, a failure of policy. Too many liberal societies are not delivering for their populations. And probably the failings in education are the most serious. I think there's also been an awful lot of institutional decay, and by that I mean a hollowing out at the local level of civic infrastructure. And there's a common cause there, and New Zealand has this in spades, but we have an obsession with centralising. And so we take decision-making, whether it's consenting, or even rubbish collections, away from local communities and put them in central government. And it makes politics seem an awfully long way away from voters. And so another strong theme of our think tank has been to encourage localism or subsidiarity for two reasons, really. First, we think decisions are made better when they're made closer to the people affected by them. And secondly, because there's good evidence that a strong civic life requires institutions operating at human scale where people can see their efforts matter. So civic architecture, and the best studies on this are from Robert Putnam and Boulding Alone in the US, documenting how voluntary associations had collapsed in the United States. And then more recently, Yuval Levin, who's documented in A Fractured Republic and then Time to Build, the phenomenon of the middle layers of society getting hollowed out. Now, doubtless, a reduction in church attendance has played a role in that, because historically the church has been at the heart of local society. But as people have drifted away from religious belief and religious attendance, church attendance, we've not replaced it with anything. And in fact, we've accelerated it by moving power to the centre. And I think that's been very harmful.
So that was your second of the four.
That's my second.
Yes, the third?
The third is the corrosive influence of postmodernism. Thinkers like Foucault claim that truth is just power and there's no such thing as objective knowledge. And I think this relativism has corroded a sense of shared beliefs. And I've probably got that in common with the Strong Gods proponents. The person who I think has got one of the best insights on this is the late Alan Bloom, who wrote The Closing of the American Mind. And he said, where everything is relative, why bother defending anything? If truth is just perspective, why engage in rigorous argument? Relativism produces intellectual passivity and erodes the shared values that bind communities.
You believe that a strong liberal society needs to be a society that believes in truth.
It does need to believe in truth, and Popper is accused of promoting relativism, but the liberal tradition from Locke through Mill and to Popper always insisted on the reality of truth and the possibility of rational inquiry. It's postmodernism that systematically undermined these foundations.
So what was the basis, therefore, of having an open society if you can know the truth? For Popper?
Well, you can...
Or for you?
It encourages a degree of epistemic humility, because what it says is, well, the truth emerges from experimentation and from colliding with error, was Mill's phrase. So the open society allows the truth to be contested.
Right. So it's not that you have to believe there's no such thing as truth or even right and wrong to be a liberal society. You need to be aware that humans often don't know what it is.
But that's right. Humans are fallible.
Yes. I mean, this was behind Hayek's view about the market economy too.
That's exactly right. So, epistemic humility or fallibilism are key features of Popper's diagnosis. And that's not relativism. It's not meaning we can't discover something or that we can't evaluate evidence, which is what Foucault's saying there's no truth. So Popper wasn't saying there's no truth. It's just saying when it comes to moral truths, a degree of humility is required.
What was the fourth?
The fourth is education and civic education, and this is also a common theme across New Zealand, Australia, the US, the UK, as we've stopped teaching a common canon of knowledge, which gives us a common vocabulary to discuss issues and resolve differences. The educationalist E.D. Hirsch warned in his seminal work, Cultural Literacy, that a shared canon of knowledge, historical events, cultural references, and civic concepts enable citizens to communicate across differences and participate in democratic life. What we've done instead with our education systems is to hollow them out of knowledge. Our kids come out of school knowing no history. Instead, we're focused on teaching skills like critical thinking. But you can't think critically about anything unless you know something about it. I certainly wouldn't want to go to that doctor that can think critically but knows nothing about human physiology.
And in fact, the research we've done here at the Centre for Independent Studies has shown that general skills can't be taught generally, but they need to be area specific. So
that's right. Domain specific knowledge. It's a doctor's not going to be any good at diagnosing what's wrong with your car unless he also knows an awful lot about engines.
Can I ask also? There's been a moral revulsion against the past of Western society, particularly colonialism, a concern about racism, which in one level seems a virtuous thing to be concerned about one's errors. But is that also undermining liberalism in the West?
We have unfortunately become very preoccupied with the past rather than looking ahead to the future.
Even though, in one level, you said we don't know our history.
Well, that's right. And of course, no one's history is very meritorious. No country's history is very meritorious if you go back into the past. And that's not to deny in any sense that grave wrongs were done to, the indigenous populations in both our countries. And in New Zealand, we've spent 30 years trying to remediate many of those problems with cross-party support for 30 years of treaty settlements. So I'm absolutely sure that's part of the problem, but it's also, I think, part of the wider politics of identity. And so it's just the particular manifestation in New Zealand and Australia, without in any way wanting to diminish the scale of the issues.
So having diagnosed those four areas, policy failures, postmodernism, institutional decay, and the last one was
education.
Educational failure, yes.
I talked about a common canon of knowledge, but civic education in particular is important, and I haven't mentioned that. And it's important because we don't teach people what it is they have to be proud of in our civic institutions.
Yes, that was my point about anxiety about our past.
Well, that's right, but you need a sense of history.
Yes.
I was speaking to the daughter of a friend of mine who'd been educated at Columbia, and she said she'd been born at the worst time in history.
Wow. She must be very old.
Yeah, born at the worst. So this is just astoundingly unaware. Well, I had to go with the PJ O'Rourke line. Well, what about dentistry? At least you don't have to go through life with painful teeth. But the place of women in most societies for most of history was pretty egregious.
I subscribe to to a website. I get these emails called the Doomslayer, and it spends a lot of time just drawing attention to little known but important truths about, in so many ways, life is so much better today than the past. There is a thing called presentism, I think, where we think today is it, today is the worst, never been. It's a lack of perspective that can lead to this strange sense that things are worse today. They often aren't, and probably aren't on matters like dentistry, well-being, so many other ways. The world is getting better.
Yes, and but warfare, famine, quite bad to be treated as a male's chattel, I would have thought. So a sense we're not teaching enough history, and we're not teaching our kids enough about their heritage and what they have to be proud of. And it's one of the great mysteries that the advantages the West provides are known to everybody except those in the West, which is why so many migrants want to move to Western Europe.
It may even be a downside of a virtue that a society which is open to be critical of itself allows criticism. I think is a mark of Western societies. But that may at times lose perspective.
That's right. So what should we do? Is that the next question?
I'm desperate to know. I was wondering whether those four things may give you a clue. Yes, what shall we do?
We've got to start with fixing the policy problems that are preventing so many in our societies from participating in the good life. I'm aware, for example, that the great work that Jennifer Buckingham has done at Centre for Independent Studies on teaching literacy, and we're going through some of the same process here. We need to fix the housing crisis so young people can afford to start families. We need to reform welfare systems that trap people in dependency. We need to improve schools so every child has a genuine opportunity. And they're not great philosophical projects. They don't need strong gods or Christian or nationalism. They're bread and butter reforms, but they matter enormously because they restore people's confidence that liberal institutions can deliver. So that's one. We need to promote decentralisation and subsidiarity, so returning power to local communities so people can see the connection between their participation in the civic process and outcomes. And that builds the habits of cooperation that sustain democracy.
Yeah.
So that's localism and subsidiarity. Hand in hand, at least. I don't think this is so much of an issue in Australia and New Zealand, but it's a big documented problem in the US. And my Strong Gods essay was mainly written for a US audience. Promote voluntary associations. Denmark's the marquee case here. 100,000 associations, voluntary associations, serving a population of 5.7 million, bringing people together. I think that's probably strong still in Australia and New Zealand. It's obviously
it's on the decline. People worry about it.
Yeah, and there are a few unforeseen reasons for that, like health and safety laws have been
Over-regulation.
Over-regulation has been a problem for voluntary associations. So we've got to get out of our own way and promote voluntary associations. Promote pride in liberal institutions through civic education, so that our kids have the moral grammar. So that they know how to participate in a pluralistic society.
Right.
They know how to resolve disagreement, and why liberal institutions matter. I think I think civic rituals are important. Australia's Anzac Day, America's 4th of July, moments that bind citizens.
Your Bledisloe Cup.
Our Bledisloe Cup. Well, that was the next one. Sport plays.
I'm sorry I raised that actually.
Well, yes, your time will come. And your cricketers have been walloping ours. So
that's fair enough. That's fair enough. Good point.
There's nothing quite like sport any longer that creates a powerful civic view. 90% of Americans say that sport brings people of different races and classes together. So it's a great enabler, and it should be cherished for that reason. And probably outside family, allegiance to sporting teams in New Zealand and Australia would probably place second, I would think. And when it is such a great uniter of people, then it's something that we should be promoting. And then finally, and perhaps most controversially, we need to confront illiberalism wherever it appears. I think the liberal project has been far too passive about illiberalism. It's the paradox of tolerance that Popper talks about. One of the paradoxes is that you can't tolerate views that are destructive of liberalism. So people that refuse to accept electoral defeat, people who use violence, people who try to suppress the opposition. Liberal societies have got to be strong at calling that out and not tolerating it.
Religious believers who want to impose their religion by law.
Absolutely.
Which is now happening. I'm sorry, they're not imposing it, they wish to do it. That's a long list, but I guess it's a big task.
It is a big task. But the one at the top of the page is probably the best place to start. We'll have far fewer people disaffected by society, disaffected or disenfranchised, if we can sort out education and housing.
I must say I've never thought until hearing you that some of the big issues of liberalism can be dealt with by very bread and butter issues of housing and education and job satisfaction.
That's right.
Yeah. By the way, you mentioned family in passing. Is family important?
Family is important, absolutely. And many of Western nations have got welfare settings that harm family formation. Tax settings in particular, tax and welfare settings. In fact, in my Strong Gods essay, I cite some Centre for Independent Studies research on the penalties imposed effectively on single earner families, penalties in the sense of not being treated as favourably as dual income families, which inadvertently act as an obstacle to family formation.
And can I raise an issue which we discussed just joking before we went to recording? You said, what if an atheist meets a bishop, or how would it go? Your understanding of liberalism is not, am I right, dependent upon an atheist worldview. It can be consistent with a Christian or Buddhist or other religious point of view.
Absolutely, it's thoroughly pluralist. So any form of religion, any form of spiritual belief, so long as it's tolerant of others.
Right. You know, I'm wondering, Roger Partridge, whether you ought to take off a year and write a book about this.
Well, it's funny you should say that. I started, and the two essays, well as a third one, Persuasion's about to publish, where I'm taking on Neil Ferguson on classical liberalism. This one's on, the one coming up is on, well, I won't say what it's on, just in case it doesn't make it into print, but it'll get there one way or the other. If it's not on Persuasion, it'll be on my Substack. It's
a challenge. Are you optimistic, Roger Pentfield, that liberalism can recover?
Yes, that was a pause though, wasn't it?
Yes, it was a pause.
I'm certainly not going to go down without it's not going to go down without a fight. And if my small voice can contribute to debate and discussion and perhaps inspire others, then all the better. No, I think liberalism has proved to be particularly enduring. If you think about the challenge it faced in Eastern Europe in the 20th century, it came through that. I think the pendulum will swing back. I think what's happening in the United States is scarier than most people think. And just to give you a practical example of how real it feels, I was told I would be ill-advised to have my golf holiday last month in Hawaii, as I was my writing in Quadrant criticizing the Trump regime was likely to have me on a list, and I might be detained and put in the cells at the border. So, one of the world's greatest, the leader of the free world, is turning into a totalitarian society, and I think it's a scary time we're at the moment.
Although, as you say, sometimes the scary times awaken people to what's at stake, and you may get then a proper reclaiming of the freedoms that have been whittled away.
That's right. Well, let's hope so, and raise a glass to that, Rob.
Can we say you've shown a commendable epistemological humility in looking at the future of liberalism?
Thank you.
This has been another edition of Liberalism in Question, and I think today you can agree it has been in question, although not without hope. I'm Rob Forsyth. Thanks for watching.